Michelle was fun, lively, like a big child. It's like she never grew up. The female Peter Pan.
She was my best friend, yeah. She's the only one that's ever stuck there, always been there.
Mine and my mum's relationship was a good relationship. We didn't hide anything. Growing up as a teenager, we got on really close. She was always there for us, no matter what. The last time I seen my mum alive was my 21st birthday. We went to my Auntie Marie's to celebrate.
It's going. Rob, quick.
Oh, that's cute.
That's a good place to be.
December the 4th, 2004, phoned up about 10 o'clock at night. She seemed tired, so I said, I'll let you go and I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Within 24 hours, I had a phone call from Mum asking if you see Michelle. I heard from Michelle. Tracy called. Can't get hold of her.
And I was starting to get worried, this gut feeling, but I thought, nah, she's gone off it. She'll be back.
I first heard the name Michelle Gunchin on the morning of the 8th of December, when the phone went from the crime manager. Michelle's car wasn't parked where it should have been, and there was blood.
When we heard that it found blood in the car, my stomach just sunk.
It's like watching this storm brew. It's this big grey cloud in the background. You're looking at it going, please don't rain. Please don't rain.
At a very early stage, we recognised that Michelle's disappearance was more than just a missing person. It was, in fact, a homicide.
Michelle's family had to wait 7 long years before her killer could face justice.
You watch many programmes and documentaries on TV, you just don't think something's going to happen to your own family. My mum was born in Islington on the 19th of August 1966. She grew up in London.
The first day I met Michelle, we were about 11 years old. First day at secondary school, I walked into the class and I saw this little girl at the back with her little black bob hair. And I went over and introduced myself, and yeah, we just inseparable, as we were told, inseparable.
I always called Michelle Auntie Michelle because she's always been there. I couldn't think of any other title that I could give her. I remember she'd come in and it would be like, kids, get your coats. And you knew you were going on an adventure or something fun was going to happen.
Me and my mum had a really good times. We used to go and see Diana Ross and to take us on family holidays, camping, the New Forest. There was good holidays.
With Tracy, it was like having another sister. We were all just family, all the kids were always together doing something, laughing, running around, rolling down hills. Michelle brought out the child in all of us and making sure that we all had fun.
It did go quiet between us, good 10 years, and then it was 2004. Suddenly I get a knock at the door, tap, tap, tap on the door, and I opened the door and my jaw dropped to the floor. And I said, I don't believe it, I was just literally just talking about you 10 minutes ago. I haven't seen you for 10 years, whoa, you're back. She goes, yeah, I'm back for good this time, we've got a new man.
He was a good person, he was a good man, he treated his mum well.
Michelle was doing some security work at this time. She would go off and do her job, like be out overnight. The last time I saw Michelle, she invited me around for dinner. And after dinner, she said, "Oh, I want to read your cards." I said, "What, tarot cards? You got tarot cards?" And she's like, yeah. Come on, let me do your cards. Come on, give them a shuffle. I don't believe in anything like that, but I shuffled them and she dealt them out. And I can't remember all the cards that she pulled out, but she said, "Well, the gods are watching over you, whatever happens." And after that, she did hers, one of the cards. She said, "Oh, there's going to be a new man in my life." She seemed troubled by the card.
In December 2004, I was living in Manchester. My mum was working at the NEC clothes show. Sometime on the 5th of December, I received a phone call from a manager. Your mum's gone missing.
Tracy phoned me. Said, "What's wrong?" Because I was just worrying because trying to get hold of Mum. She's not turned up for work. I just dismissed it because I thought, well, this is Michelle kind of thing. She will go off, just get her head together and it should pop up somewhere, and come back.
I think I said to Mum, she'll probably turn up at yours with some fireworks and a drink,
I phoned all the hospitals in and around Birmingham and I was sat there till 3 in the morning. There was no sightings of my mum at all.
Michelle was working as a security guard, and on the 3rd of December and the 4th, she did a shift at the new exhibition centre. After a shift, she was having a drink with friends at the Dubliner in Birmingham. She'd had to stay there because her original hotel, the premises had been flooded.
Today, the Dubliner still exists, but it is in a different format. So now it is a rock venue. The Dubliner was a popular Irish pub. It was known for being quite lively, for having live music. At the time of Michelle's disappearance, there were rooms upstairs in the pub that were available to rent on a B&B basis.
Michelle's 2 colleagues agreed that they would meet up later in the evening for a drink in the bar. They went to their rooms. Just before 9:30, Michelle hadn't joined, so one of them went to see her and saw her in her room. That's the last time anybody saw Michelle alive other than a killer. About an hour later, 10:30ish time, we know she speaks to her partner and her daughter on the phone. Again, that's the last time anybody spoke to her other than a killer that we know of.
The following morning, 2 of her colleagues went to her room to see whether she was ready to go to carry out a further shift, but they could find no trace of her. Some of her personal belongings, including her mobile telephone, were in her room. She'd had 27 missed calls.
"20 years ago, this was a bedroom, and there was a bed where I'm standing. On it was Michelle's belongings, including the mobile phone with the 27 missed phone calls. However, at 5 o'clock, when they came back to check the room, her belongings had gone. At about 9:30 on the Sunday, her colleagues went out onto Mill Lane, which is where she parked her blue Ford Escort, and it wasn't there. So they had to make a decision, and that was need to formally report Michelle missing to the police.
I didn't sleep for about 3 days. I tried to be normal for my younger brother. I tried to hold things together. It was a blur.
We spoke every day on the phone, many times through the day, having daily chats.
I was scared doing that press conference.
Mum was fun loving and would talk to anyone. I know my mum loves me and my family, and that she would never left us on our own free will.
No recall of doing it.
The police came to interview all of us, asking standard question, any reason for her going missing, any suspicions, all the usual easy stuff.
When somebody is reported missing to the police, you make an assessment. Is it high, medium or standard risk? And that will determine the investigative focus.
We're all creatures of habit to a greater or lesser degree. And that means that we frequent places, we use mobile telephones, we access our bank accounts, we meet people. And in Michelle's case, all those things came to an abrupt end.
When the car was found on the 7th, that was when that cloud really hit.
Michelle initially parked her car next to the Dubliner pub in Mill Lane. Mill Lane runs between the Dubliner and the coach station. When it was found abandoned on the 7th, it was about half a mile away on Ray Street. We are about 5 minutes walking distance from the Dubliner pub. Where this car is parked is roughly where Michelle's blue Ford Escort was discovered at about 2:15 on the 7th of December, which is the day after she was reported missing. What was readily apparent to the officer that found the car was its state. It had got thick mud deposited on the wheels, the wheel arches, the wing, the door frame, the under panel. This is an inner city area. We haven't got muddy rural lanes. There isn't anywhere where you could drive through and capture so much mud on a car. That was unusual.
A cursory and initial examination of the car revealed that there were bloodstains, and also in the boot was what was believed to be Michelle's fluorescent work jacket, which also bore bloodstains on the inner surface. When you find a car with bloodstains, that is very, very indicative of something sinister having occurred to Michelle. Andy Hoff was assigned as the senior investigating officer, and he made all the initial inquiries, began for a CCTV trawl, and the inquiries were also commenced at the pub.
Phone records are incredibly important. It shows the movements of the individual on the day of their murder. It shows who they might have been in contact with. And all of these things can provide clues as to where the individual ended up meeting their death.
It was the case of identifying, tracking her movements on the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th as best we could.
There was a history of missed calls, predominantly from Tracy, but there was nothing of any significant nature that at that stage would move the inquiry on.
Statistically, women are more likely to be murdered by somebody that is known to them, a partner, it might be a sibling, it could be a friend, it could be an ex-partner.
Michelle's estranged husband was spoken to by officers. He, by default, is a person of interest to the inquiry because they are estranged. He's also the father of one of the children. So it is important, but we quickly identified that he wasn't in Birmingham at the time, and we could formally eliminate him as being involved in a disappearance.
On the 9th of December, images were recovered from 2 speed cameras, one on the Hagley Road and one on the Bristol Road. Those depicted Michelle's car being driven in excess of the speed limit through or beyond those cameras.
This is 8:30 in the morning. You can see Michelle's car quite clearly. It's clean. There isn't any mud deposits on the wheels or on the wheel arches or the side of the car. If you look at the driver's seat, there is a clear image of the back of a male. And if you look in the near side mirror, you can see an outline of their face. And you can see the seatbelt. So somebody is sat in that seat with the seatbelt on. You can see a mop of black hair by the headrest, and we believe that's Michelle seatbelted into the passenger seat.
I remember being shown the CCTV of someone driving my mum's car. At the time, we just wanted answers. Who was it?
Further footage of Michelle's car recovered on the 10th of December was very grainy, was very unclear, but seemed to show what might have been described as potentially some frenetic activity by Michelle's car.
We see Michelle's car leaving Mill Lane just after 7 o'clock in the morning. There is an image of something or somebody going to the car. We can't determine who it is, whether it's 1 or 2 people, but we've got enough to say that's her car coming out of Ray Street and driving away.
I think when you see those images, it really just adds to the fear that Michelle has been subject of very serious assault and indeed worse. Controlled circumstances, the licensee of the Dubliner pub was shown the images, and he was able to say with almost certainty that the person depicted driving the vehicle was in fact Martin Stafford.
Martin Stafford was working at the Dublin Hotel. He had a job collecting glasses at the time.
Martin Stafford was a 44-year-old man who didn't really have a fixed abode, quite possibly due to the number of criminal offences that he had in his history.
Stafford had already got 23 offences committed in Ireland, including sexual offences.
He is fitting the profile of somebody who is of real interest to me. Martin Stafford was actually stopping in the same set of flats as Michelle. He left the Dubliner either on the Monday or the Tuesday of that week. So he's now gone without reason.
Serial sex offenders are unable to control their urges, so sex offences can increase in severity in order to get the same response and the same pleasure. He needs to find his victims, he may need to increase the intensity and the frequency of these crimes as well, and that means that this person is a highly dangerous individual.
In Ireland, he basically burgled a factory and he indecently assaulted and stripped the 2 cleaners who were female, and he locked them in a cabinet overnight.
He's a glass collector in a pub. It's unlikely they'd be doing criminal record checks or security checks on him. He has very easy access to victims. He has an opportunity as a perpetrator to stand and observe, work out which individuals might be alone, who might be vulnerable, and that position gave him an opportunity to do that and to ultimately identify his next victim.
Stafford stayed with an associate man that ultimately we were able to trace. And during the course of his staying with the man, they spoke about if they had a body to dispose of, how they would do it. And Stafford actually told him, I would dump it in some building footings somewhere around Birmingham, knowing that the workmen would come and cover the remains in concrete.
Having identified Stafford in the car, I can declare him a suspect. That enables me to get a search warrant, so I can do a forensic sweep of his room for any material that may be relevant. We took the bed sheet in because we know he's got sexual offences in his past. Could he have sexually assaulted Michelle in his room before he's taken her in the car? So we took the bed linen and we prioritised that to the scientists at the lab. The picture that I'm looking at now is a photograph of Michelle's fluorescent jacket that was taken from her car. You can see on the inner lining of the back there is blood staining here and then up the central spine of the coat. It's contact blood, which means it's been in contact with her body when she's been bleeding.
On the 13th of December, we had confirmation that the blood found on the car and on her fluorescent jacket was that of Michelle's. And it really just added to our worst fears that Michelle had been subject of a very, very serious attack and was possibly deceased.
Michelle was last seen alive here at the Dubliner pub in Digbeth at 9:30 p.m. on the 4th of December. Michelle's car triggered 2 speed cameras the following Tuesday on the Hagley Road in Birmingham and here on the Bristol Road. The driver of that car has been identified as Martin Stafford. The following day, he caught a coach to Dublin from here at Digbeth coach station. Now, he'd been staying just 2 doors away from Michelle in a Dubliner pub at the time of her disappearance.
Within 24 hours of my mum's disappearance, I knew my mum was dead. I had a gut instinct. I just knew. And I had to hide that away from family.
With Michelle, I was used to having gaps with her not being there. She'd go back to Manchester or she'd be working away. But within 24 hours, I think we all had this kind of niggling at the back, like, it's not right. Something's not right. She would have got in contact or she would have turned up at mum's or here.
I didn't sleep for about 3 days. The media ended up outside my mum's front door. So I literally opened the door, told them to go away, shut the door.
I just convinced myself that she just walked off. Nothing had happened, but when they found the car and the jacket in the back and there was blood on it and mud on the car, and it kind of started to sink in. I was just thinking, oh, she's out there and she's freezing, she's cold, she's laying in a ditch. Where is she?
The murder of an individual, it destroys the family and the friends of that victim. To know that someone has hurt somebody that you love in unthinkable ways, I would argue that people quite possibly never come to terms with it, unfortunately.
The Ford Escort was subjected to a very, very thorough forensic examination. There were semen stains that were found on the front passenger seats of Michelle's car, which were obviously very, very significant.
On the 17th of December, we got the result that we were hoping for, which was semen staining on the car seat matched Stafford's bed linen. On the same day as the semen stain result, we also identified that he's wanted for 2 matters by the Metropolitan Police. An allegation of rape, and he's also on bail for a case of indecent assault against a man. we got confirmation from CCTV at Holyhead that Stafford had boarded the ferry. So we now know he's gone to Dublin.
When Stafford arrived at Dublin, he relocated to a local coach company to make his next move. He was throwing another passengers' cases about that were in the hold of the coach. Whilst this was taking place, a woman intervened to say, "Will you stop throwing my luggage around?" And to which a reply from Stafford was, "You want to be careful of, I've already put one woman down, you'll be the next."
I sent my deputy SIO over to meet the police in Ireland to talk about what inquiries can they make on our behalf, identify where Stafford is, and also for them to manage any risk that he may pose to other individuals, particularly women.
It was torture, wondering when we'd be able to catch him and bring him back to answer the police's questions.
I think when I first heard his name, that's when it really hit home that something horrific had happened. He had a history of keeping women against their will, locking them in cupboards or something. He tried to hold on to hope, but you just knew this was it.
With offenders like this, what we're seeing is that the crimes are escalating in severity, now resulting in a murder. I would expect that he will lie low for a short period of time, probably enjoying the feeling and processing that feeling, and then he would look at acting again. So for the police, it's really important that they catch him now before he has the chance to do this to any other woman.
In the new year, the paleontologist contacted me to say that she had found pollen debris within the soil deposits around the wheels that was indicative of being from the Franklin area of Birmingham.
A paleontologist can examine the soil for fibres, plants, and other things that will make it potentially unique to a particular location.
Franklin is on the western side of Birmingham, the northeastern side of Worcestershire. You've got a busy motorway, rolling hills, lots of country lanes, a reservoir. It looked like an obvious place to look.
It's a wide open space, lots of greenery. The sort of place where one could understand an offender wanting to dispose of a body. There were searches conducted, but unfortunately they proved to be fruitless, and sadly we found no trace of Michelle Gunshon's body.
In the middle of January, we know Stafford is in Ireland, and we're preparing a file for extradition back to the UK. I also started a proof of life investigation, which was, can we prove that Michelle is still alive? We had to go through her yearly routine to establish on this day she would have sent a birthday card, for example. She hasn't been to the hairdresser, she hasn't been to the dentist. You know, everything she would do on a day-to-day basis hasn't happened. The presumption is she is dead.
Every investigator's fear is, when they investigate a no-body murder, wants to do their utmost to find the missing body or remains. And it's a matter of frustration, regret, upset, and when that can't be achieved.
In early March of 2005, we get the call from the police in Ireland. Stafford has committed a new offence. He's abducted a girl and he's kept her prisoner in a railway carriage. She managed to escape, but he's been arrested. We now know that he is likely to go to trial, and if found guilty, is going to receive a lengthy custodial sentence, which he did. It was important to know that Stafford would face justice. He wasn't going to present a risk to anybody else, but it was a waiting game.
When Stafford was sentenced, the case came to a natural end in the sense that there was nothing else left to do. We had to wait until we could get Stafford back to the UK.
So it was a case of get your ducks lined up and we wait.
So that was the bike ride day. We just crashed out, basking in the sun with that stupid hat on that eye, inside out. We would go out on bike rides, climb trees, you know, not girly things. We weren't girly or anything, you know, don't sit there putting makeup, none of that. Just tie your hair back or just let it go wild, you know, we were wild, I suppose. Free. We like to be free.
Michelle's family were aware that we had a strong suspect and sufficient evidence for the matter to go to trial. But we were not able to make a promise that we would be able to find Michelle's body. That would remain something that we would have to continually try and progress.
I started having nightmares of my mum rotting in a house and other nightmares as well. I found out I was pregnant in May 2005. That wanted my mum. Just didn't have my mum to tell. My mum was very family orientated. She kept all the family together. In 2008, I did a memorial service for my mum. Family attended, police attended, friends. My son Reese also attended when he was 2 years old. My granddad David wrote a letter just for what my mum was like. My daughter Michelle, she was always a happy child and a good one too.
It just made us all choke up because it just hit home. And it's like a funeral, but it's like without the body. It's as close as we're going to get to putting her to rest.
The police contacted me to say that Martin Stafford was getting extradited. I asked the police, was my mum raped? The police responded, we are charging Martin Stafford with rape. was the hardest thing I ever had to understand.
Stafford is eventually extradited back to the UK on Tuesday the 13th of December 2011. He appears before the magistrates in Birmingham the following day. All we are permitted to do is to take a sample to test his DNA so that we have an evidential sample to match to the bed linen and the semen stain in the car. We are not permitted to interview him. That is the legislation, that is the law. He can volunteer to talk to us, but we can't start that conversation. So we never interviewed him. All we were able to do was get a swab for the DNA, charge him, put him before the court.
When I knew he was going to face charges for my mum, I felt relieved in a way. My questions may be answered.
On the 17th of July 2012, the trial of Stafford for the murder and rape of Michelle Gunshan began.
When I first saw Martin Stafford, I found him impossible to read. I gained the impression that he was an individual that had a lifestyle of abuse. Clearly drink and drugs had taken its toll, and really he was a man with no authority in the courtroom.
I attended the court every day for 10 days. The trial was hard, but I also wanted to listen to everything what they had against Martin Stafford.
He denied it all at first when he was in court, and it just made you angry.
Stafford seemingly has nothing to lose with his behaviours. If he ends up in prison, he ends up in prison. If he doesn't, he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't have a lot in the outside world to live for. The fact that he's gone to court and just denied it, to me, just says that he doesn't actually really care about this system whatsoever.
I was in the court when the jury returned their verdict, and of all the times in your professional career when you want something to go well, that is the time. When the jury returned a guilty verdict, I felt a great deal of relief. A great deal of relief. On the 31st of July 2012, following his conviction, Martin Stafford was sentenced to 33 years imprisonment.
I couldn't stop crying. It was like, yes, we've found him guilty.
Her and me still wouldn't tell us where she was, and I just found that very inhumane, like the one thing that you can do to make yourself look a bit more human, and he couldn't even give us that.
When the body isn't found, it really has an impact on the grieving process, because even in animals, the animals need to see the body of their, say, dead mate in order to be able to grieve and process and move on. Without that, the grieving process is affected. There's always going to be that question of, are they dead? What if they turn up? It's very hard to have closure. It's something that hangs over them for the rest of their lives.
In 2015, I was notified that Martin Stafford had passed away in prison, and the knowledge that there was no way of ever getting to Stafford to actually establish what he had done with Michelle's body Really left a void and a feeling of just major upset and disappointment.
Mum phoned and told us that Martin Stafford passed away. And your first thought is, did rotten hell. And then it kind of dawns, but he knows where she is. Definitely. I'm going to be able to get them answers now.
I felt angry. Suddenly was just like, what about my mum now? All I think about when I go to Birmingham or anything is, where is she? It's cold. She never looked the cold.
I think the issue with Stafford all along has been about power and control, and this is him not telling them where the body is his one last attempt at some semblance of control and power in his life. And by keeping this information, he's able to keep some control over that crime.
I think after 20 years, it's highly unlikely that Michelle will be found. I hope that I'm wrong for the sake of Tracy and the rest of the family, but experience tells me that she won't be.
I go back to the conversation that Martin Stafford had about if he had a body to dispose of, he would put it in some building footing somewhere, and that may be the case.
Michelle's remains will only be found by accident, unless there is a prisoner who served time with Stafford and he told them he let slip where she was. We know she was killed, we know she was raped, but she's still a missing person, and that hasn't changed. That bothers me.
I miss her. I do miss her. I'll never have a friend like her, ever. You have friends that come and go. She was one of those friends that would be there forever, except somebody took her away. So, yeah.
20 years on, it still really hurts because of the not knowing. We don't have anywhere to go, and obviously this is the place where she was last seen. Part of me feels a little bit closer to my mum when I come and lay flowers. My mum was spontaneous, funny, outgoing. My mum means everything. She's the world. I love my mum very much, and I miss her every day. Hopefully one day she'll come home.
Shattered Evidence, a fictional cold case thriller. This story is entirely fictional. There are crimes that disappear because evidence is lost. There are crimes that disappear because witnesses grow old. And then there are crimes that disappear because someone spent years making certain every answer stayed buried. The first mistake happened on a rainy Thursday morning. Forensic analyst Ava Carter had examined thousands of evidence boxes during her career. Most contained exactly what the labels promised: old photographs, fingerprint cards, brittle reports, forgotten clothing sealed in fading paper envelopes. They were relics of investigations that had exhausted every lead until time itself became the final suspect. Box 314 looked no different. Dust coated its corners. The property seal had yellowed with age. A faded inventory card listed only 4 words: do not destroy. Review. No detective signature. No explanation. No case number. Only a date from almost 40 years earlier. Ava frowned. Every piece of evidence belonged somewhere. This one seemed to belong nowhere. She carefully cut the brittle tape and lifted the lid. Inside rested a single envelope. No fingerprints marked the surface. No handwriting identified the sender. Only one sentence had been typed across the front: Someone knew the evidence would survive longer than the lie. The room suddenly felt quieter. Ava opened the envelope. Inside lay an undeveloped roll of 35mm film, a cracked cassette tape, and a laboratory request form that had never been completed. Across the bottom of the form, someone had written in blue ink, "When technology catches up, try again." She checked the archive database. Nothing. No matching inventory number. No missing person report. No homicide file. No court record. It was as if the evidence had been prepared for a case that officially never existed. Detective Daniel Brooks received the call just before noon. He expected another paperwork error. Instead, he found Ava standing over the evidence table without saying a word. She simply handed him the envelope. He read the message once. Then again. Where did this come from? The archive says nowhere. That's impossible. I know. He examined the cassette. The plastic housing had cracked with age, but the tape inside remained intact. A tiny white label carried only one handwritten word. Listen. Hours later, audio specialists restored enough of the damaged cassette to recover fragments of sound. Static, wind, footsteps over gravel. Then a woman whispered only 5 words. "They're watching the wrong road." The recording ended abruptly. No scream, no gunshot, no names, just silence. Daniel replayed the sentence several times. "They're watching the wrong road." It sounded less like fear, more like a warning. Meanwhile, the undeveloped film was sent to the imaging laboratory. Every technician expected blank frames ruined by time. Instead, image after image slowly emerged. A deserted farmhouse, a narrow wooden bridge, a rusted mailbox without a name. The final photograph stopped everyone in the room. It showed a man standing beside an old pickup truck. His face had been scratched away, deliberately, not by age, not by damage. Someone had destroyed only his identity. Everything else remained untouched. Daniel pinned the photographs across the evidence board. The bridge, the farmhouse, the mailbox, the faceless man. Ava noticed something almost immediately. The shadows. Daniel looked closer. They're wrong. Every photograph had been taken within minutes of one another, yet the shadows pointed in different directions. The locations were connected. The timeline was not. Whoever assembled the roll wanted the viewer to believe everything happened on the same day. It hadn't. The film was telling a story, just not in chronological order. That evening, Ava searched the basement archive again. She wasn't looking for evidence anymore. She was looking for absence. Empty shelves, missing inventory cards, boxes whose numbering skipped without explanation. Near the back of the storage room, she found an old steel filing cabinet that no longer appeared on any building map. Most drawers were empty. One refused to open. After several attempts, the rusted lock finally gave way. Inside rested a single index card. Typed across the top were 3 words. "Second review required." Below them appeared 6 inventory numbers. 5 had been crossed out. The 6th matched the mysterious evidence box sitting upstairs. In the lower corner, someone had added one final handwritten note. "If box 314 is ever opened, begin with the bridge." Ava hurried upstairs. Daniel had already spread the photographs across a large city map. Without speaking, she placed a card beside him. He read the note. Neither of them said a word for several seconds. Outside, rain began striking the windows, exactly as it had on the morning the forgotten box was opened. Inside, 2 investigators realized they were no longer reopening an abandoned file. They were following instructions left decades earlier by someone who believed the truth would eventually find people willing to keep searching. Shattered evidence. A fictional cold case thriller. The bridge stood exactly where the photograph suggested it would. Weathered wooden planks stretched across a narrow river that barely seemed deep enough to deserve its own name. Moss clung to the support beams. Rusted bolts protruded from warped timber. Nothing about the place looked remarkable. Yet Daniel Brooks could not shake the feeling that someone had expected him to arrive. Ava Carter walked slowly across the bridge, comparing every angle with the restored photograph. The railing has been repaired. Daniel nodded, but the support posts haven't. She crouched beside one of the original beams. Someone had carved a series of shallow marks into the wood decades earlier. Rain, sun, and time had almost erased them, but under oblique light the pattern became visible. 3 parallel lines. A circle. Another 3 lines. Not graffiti. A marker. Someone wanted this found. Ava whispered. Daniel photographed every inch before searching beneath the bridge, near the western bank, half buried beneath gravel and tangled roots. His flashlight caught the corner of a rusted metal box. It had no lock, only layers of mud and decades of silence. Inside lay a folded topographic map, sealed in wax paper. The paper had yellowed, but the ink remained sharp. Several rural roads were circled in red. One road had been crossed out. Another carried a handwritten instruction. Not this road, the service road. Daniel immediately remembered the recovered recording. They're watching the wrong road. The sentence was no longer cryptic. It was directional. Back at the lab, the map was scanned at high resolution. Magnification revealed faint pencil notes almost invisible to the naked eye. Times, weather conditions, vehicle descriptions. Whoever created the map had been documenting movements, not destinations. Ava overlaid the markings onto modern satellite imagery. Most of the roads still existed. One did not. The old service road had disappeared beneath a dense forest after years of abandonment. It wasn't removed, she said quietly. It was forgotten. Daniel looked at the screen. Then that's where we go. The following morning, they hiked along what remained of the overgrown track. Nature had reclaimed nearly everything. Tree roots split the old gravel path. Branches formed a tunnel overhead, shutting out much of the daylight. About a mile into the forest, Ava stopped. Look! A rusted mile marker leaned sideways beneath creeping vines. Someone had painted a small white arrow on its back. Not recently. Long ago, the paint had faded almost to gray. The arrow pointed away from the road, into the trees. They followed it. After another 100 yards, the forest opened into a clearing. Only the cracked concrete foundation of a small maintenance building remained. The roof had collapsed years earlier. Windows were gone. The silence felt absolute. Daniel searched the interior while Ava examined the foundation. Near one corner, she noticed a loose concrete block. Together they lifted it. Hidden beneath was a waterproof cylinder. Inside rested a notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Every page had been filled in neat block letters. No names, no accusations, just observations. The truck returned at 8:42. Headlights off. 3 people. One never came back. Daniel closed the notebook slowly. This isn't someone's memory. Ava nodded. It's a log. The final page was different. Instead of observations, it contained a message. If you're reading this, I failed to stop them. Don't trust the first explanation. Someone replaced the truth with a simpler story. Neither investigator spoke. There was no dramatic confession, no identity revealed, only the unmistakable realization that someone, years earlier, had believed the evidence alone would someday be enough to continue what they could not finish. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of leaves across the abandoned clearing. Daniel slipped the notebook into an evidence bag. For the first time since opening box 314, they were no longer chasing fragments left by chance. Someone had left a trail, not to expose a killer, but to ensure that, no matter how many years passed, the truth would always remain one discovery away from being seen again. Shattered evidence, a fictional cold case thriller. The notebook changed everything, not because it answered a single question, because it proved someone had been watching. Every page followed the same disciplined pattern. Time, weather, direction of travel, number of vehicles, number of people, no opinions, no speculation, just facts recorded with the precision of someone who knew memory could fail, but ink would not. Back at the forensic laboratory, Ava carefully photographed each page before examining the notebook itself. The paper was old. The binding had nearly separated, but one detail immediately caught her attention. The final 20 pages had been cut away with a razor, not torn, removed deliberately. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. So someone came back. Ava nodded, and they knew exactly what they wanted. The restoration team examined the notebook under multispectral lighting. Indentation from the missing pages slowly emerged. Not every word could be recovered, only fragments. Truck changed. That license begins. Don't use. That meeting moved. Then one sentence appeared almost perfectly intact. If anything happens to me, the photographs are the only timeline they won't expect. Daniel stared at the screen. The film. They weren't random pictures, Ava replied. They were a coded sequence. The photographs from box 314 were pinned across the evidence wall once again. This time they ignored what each image showed. Instead, they measured shadows, cloud positions, tree growth, and the direction of reflected sunlight. Hours passed. Then Ava quietly moved the final photograph, the one with the faceless man, to the beginning of the sequence. Everything suddenly fit. The bridge came second. The abandoned service road came third. The farmhouse came last. Someone had rearranged the negatives before sealing them away, not to hide the truth, to make sure only someone willing to question the obvious would find it. The farmhouse sat alone beyond miles of neglected fields. Its roof had partially collapsed. Windows were shattered. The porch leaned dangerously toward the ground. Yet, one detail immediately felt wrong. Dust covered every surface inside, except one narrow path across the wooden floor. Daniel crouched. No footprints. Exactly, Ava replied. The dust settled around something. She followed the clear strip to an old cast-iron stove standing against the far wall. The stove had not been used in decades. Still, it moved far too easily when Daniel pushed against it. Behind it, hidden inside the brick chimney, rested a small metal container. Inside were dozens of photographic negatives, every one carefully numbered. Most had deteriorated beyond recovery. A handful survived. The restored images revealed ordinary scenes: a roadside diner, a fuel station, a grain elevator, a church parking lot. At first glance, none appeared significant. Then Ava noticed the same dark pickup truck parked in every photograph. Different days, different weather, different locations. Always the same vehicle. Always in the background, not following the photographer. Watching, Daniel circled the truck in each image. It wasn't part of the story. It was following it. Late that evening, while reviewing the negatives frame by frame, Ava paused on one image that had nearly been discarded because of damage. A reflection in the diner's front window showed someone holding the camera. Only a silhouette, no face, but hanging from a photographer's shoulder was a distinctive leather satchel. Daniel immediately opened the evidence envelope from box 314, the laboratory request form. Along one corner appeared the faint imprint of a manufacturer's logo. The same satchel. The photographer and the person who assembled box 314 were almost certainly the same individual, not an anonymous witness. The architect of the entire trail. A heavy silence settled over the investigation room. The board was no longer filled with disconnected clues. It showed intention. Someone had documented movements, hidden evidence in multiple locations, reordered photographs, recorded warnings, prepared instructions, then vanished before revealing why. Daniel looked once more at the typed message on the original envelope. Someone knew the evidence would survive longer than the lie. For the first time, the sentence no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a promise. Outside, night settled over the city. Inside the lab, the recovered negatives dried beneath soft archival lights, each frame revealing another tiny fragment of a story that had waited decades, not to be remembered, but to be finished. Shattered evidence, a fictional cold case thriller. The next morning began before sunrise. No one had slept much. Daniel Brooks sat alone in the incident room, staring at the wall of photographs that now covered nearly every available surface. Red strings had been replaced by timelines. Timelines had been replaced by maps. Every clue seemed to point toward a single conclusion without ever stating it outright. Someone had anticipated failure. Every hidden notebook, every buried container, every photograph, every recording. None of them had been designed to solve the mystery immediately. They had been designed to survive. Ava Carter entered carrying a fresh evidence folder. I found something. Daniel looked up. The photographic negatives. She placed 2 enlargements on the table. They weren't all taken with the same camera. He frowned. You're sure? She nodded. The lenses leave different distortion patterns. Most came from one camera. She slid a second enlargement forward, but these 3 didn't. The difference was subtle, almost invisible. Yet once she pointed it out, Daniel couldn't ignore it. Someone else had been documenting the same events. 2 photographers, 2 perspectives, 1 hidden story. The recovered negatives were arranged chronologically using vegetation growth, weather records, and the angle of the afternoon sun. Only then did another pattern emerge. The second photographer never appeared first. Always second. Always farther away. Watching the first photographer. Not following. Observing. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So, whoever documented everything, that was also being documented. Ava finished. The room fell silent. Later that afternoon, a forensic imaging specialist restored a damaged corner of 1 negative using non-destructive digital enhancement. A shape slowly emerged from what had looked like random scratches. Not a face. A license plate. Most characters remained unreadable. Only 4 survived. K7L2. It wasn't enough to identify a vehicle, but it was enough to narrow possibilities. Daniel requested archive registration records. Thousands became hundreds. Hundreds became dozens. Dozens became 4. 3 vehicles had been destroyed decades earlier. The 4th had vanished from official records after being reported sold through a private transaction. No buyer listed. No destination. Just another loose thread. That evening, Ava returned to the abandoned farmhouse alone. Not because she expected to find new evidence. Because something still bothered her. The hidden compartment behind the stove had been carefully built. Too carefully. People rarely create 1 secret space. They usually create 2. She examined every brick surrounding the fireplace. Most sounded solid. 1 produced a dull, hollow echo. Removing it revealed a narrow cavity. Inside rested nothing except a folded sheet of graph paper. No writing. Just tiny pinholes. Hundreds of them. At first glance, they appeared random. Then Ava held the page against the farmhouse window. Sunlight passed through the holes, projecting tiny points across the opposite wall. The points aligned with old nail holes already embedded in the timber. Together, they formed a simple outline, a compass, an arrow, and beneath it, 1 word, north. Daniel arrived minutes later. Neither of them spoke. They simply followed the direction indicated by the projected arrow. Almost 200 yards beyond the farmhouse stood the remains of a stone well hidden beneath vines. The cover had partially collapsed. Inside, instead of water, they found years of fallen leaves. Daniel shone his flashlight downward. Halfway to the bottom, something reflected the beam, a metal case. The recovery took nearly an hour. The hinges had rusted shut. When the forensic team finally opened it back at the laboratory, everyone leaned forward expecting a dramatic revelation. Instead, they found something quieter, a stack of sealed letters. Every envelope carried a different date. Every one remained unopened. On the first envelope, written in neat block capitals, appeared a single instruction: open only after the evidence has been understood. Daniel looked at Ava. She smiled faintly. We're not there yet. He carefully returned the envelope to the case. For the first time since Box 314 had been opened, neither of them felt impatient. Whoever had built this trail had never intended the truth to be discovered in a single breakthrough. It was meant to be earned 1 careful observation at a time. Outside, the last light of day faded behind distant hills. Inside the evidence room, the sealed letters waited in absolute silence, holding their story for one investigation that was finally asking the right questions. Shattered evidence. a fictional cold case thriller. The next morning began before sunrise. No one had slept much. Daniel Brooks sat alone in the incident room, staring at the wall of photographs that now covered nearly every available surface. Red strings have been replaced by timelines. Timelines have been replaced by maps. Every clue seemed to point toward a single conclusion without ever stating it outright. Someone had anticipated failure. Every hidden notebook, every buried container, every photograph, every recording. None of them had been designed to solve the mystery immediately. They had been designed to survive. Ava Carter entered carrying a fresh evidence folder. I found something. Daniel looked up. The photographic negatives. She placed 2 enlargements on the table. They weren't all taken with the same camera. He frowned. You're sure? She nodded. The lenses leave different distortion patterns. Most came from one camera. She slid a second enlargement forward, but these 3 didn't. The difference was subtle, almost invisible. Yet once she pointed it out, Daniel couldn't ignore it. Someone else had been documenting the same events. 2 photographers, 2 perspectives, 1 hidden story. The recovered negatives were arranged chronologically using vegetation growth, weather records, and the angle of the afternoon sun. Only then did another pattern emerge. The second photographer never appeared first. Always second. Always farther away. Watching the first photographer. Not following. Observing. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So, whoever documented everything that was also being documented. Ava finished. The room fell silent. Later that afternoon, a forensic imaging specialist restored a damaged corner of 1 negative using non-destructive digital enhancement. A shape slowly emerged from what had looked like random scratches. Not a face. A license plate. Most characters remained unreadable. Only 4 survived. K7L2. It wasn't enough to identify a vehicle, but it was enough to narrow possibilities. Daniel requested archive registration records. Thousands became hundreds. Hundreds became dozens. Dozens became 4. 3 vehicles had been destroyed decades earlier. The 4th had vanished from official records after being reported sold through a private transaction. No buyer listed. No destination. Just another loose thread. That evening, Ava returned to the abandoned farmhouse alone. Not because she expected to find new evidence. Because something still bothered her. The hidden compartment behind the stove had been carefully built. Too carefully. People rarely create 1 secret space. They usually create 2. She examined every brick surrounding the fireplace. Most sounded solid. 1 produced a dull, hollow echo. Removing it revealed a narrow cavity. Inside rested nothing except a folded sheet of graph paper. No writing. Just tiny pinholes. Hundreds of them. At first glance, they appeared random. Then Ava held the page against the farmhouse window. Sunlight passed through the holes, projecting tiny points across the opposite wall. The points aligned with old nail holes already embedded in the timber. Together, they formed a simple outline, a compass, an arrow, and beneath it, 1 word. North. Daniel arrived minutes later. Neither of them spoke. They simply followed the direction indicated by the projected arrow. Almost 200 yards beyond the farmhouse stood the remains of a stone well hidden beneath vines. The cover had partially collapsed. Inside, instead of water, they found years of fallen leaves. Daniel shone his flashlight downward. Halfway to the bottom, something reflected the beam, a metal case. The recovery took nearly an hour. The hinges had rusted shut. When the forensic team finally opened it back at the laboratory, everyone leaned forward expecting a dramatic revelation. Instead, they found something quieter, a stack of sealed letters. Every envelope carried a different date. Every one remained unopened. On the first envelope, written in neat block capitals, appeared a single instruction: open only after the evidence has been understood. Daniel looked at Ava. She smiled faintly. We're not there yet. He carefully returned the envelope to the case. For the first time since Box 314 had been opened, neither of them felt impatient. Whoever had built this trail had never intended the truth to be discovered in a single breakthrough. It was meant to be earned one careful observation at a time. Outside, the last light of day faded behind distant hills. Inside the evidence room, the sealed letters waited in absolute silence, holding their story for one investigation that was finally asking the right questions. The Glass Labyrinth, a fictional mystery thriller. No one remembered who had built the maze. That was the first strange thing. The second was that every map of Blackridge showed something different. On older maps, the hill overlooking the town was empty. On newer maps, a narrow footpath climbed toward a circle of trees. Local children claimed an abandoned greenhouse stood there, hidden beneath ivy and broken glass. Older residents insisted nothing had ever existed on the hill at all. Architect Mara Ellison dismissed the stories as local folklore until a survey drone photographed something impossible. Beneath the tangled canopy, sunlight reflected from hundreds of shattered glass panels arranged in perfect geometric lines. The image looked less like a ruin and more like a puzzle waiting to be assembled. She hiked to the hill the next morning. The climb was steep. Mist clung to the trees, muting every sound except the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Then the forest ended. Before her stood the remains of an enormous Victorian glass house. Its iron framework still reached toward the sky like the ribs of some forgotten giant. Most of the panes had shattered decades earlier. Those that remained reflected the morning light into dazzling fragments that danced across the overgrown floor. A weathered brass plaque rested beside the entrance. The inscription had almost disappeared. Only 4 words remained legible. Follow the light. Mara stepped inside. The air felt strangely still. Rows of cracked glass walls stretched in every direction, dividing the greenhouse into dozens of narrow corridors. At first they seemed random. Then she noticed something. Every corridor reflected the sunlight differently. Some glowed warm gold. Others shimmered with pale blue light. One passage remained completely dark. She chose the brightest path. 10 minutes later, she emerged exactly where she had started. She frowned. She tried again. Different corridor. Same result. The maze was not circular. It simply redirected every wrong choice. Only after nearly an hour did she stop walking and begin observing. A single ray of sunlight entered through a broken roof panel. It struck one pane, then another, then another. The reflections formed a continuous line leading through the labyrinth. Not random. Designed. She smiled. The building had never been intended to trap visitors. It expected them to pay attention. Step by step, she followed the chain of reflected light until the maze opened into a circular chamber hidden at its center. Unlike the ruined corridors outside, this room remained almost untouched. A crystal prism hung from the ceiling. As sunlight passed through it, hundreds of tiny rainbows spread across the walls. Each rainbow illuminated a fragment of an engraved mural. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they revealed an enormous image of a tree whose branches reached across the entire chamber. Its leaves were not carved. They were empty spaces. Beneath the mural stood a stone pedestal holding a wooden box. Inside lay dozens of delicate glass leaves. Every leaf bore a different engraved word. Curiosity, patience, memory, kindness, wonder. Alongside them rested a folded note. Every visitor leaves with one leaf and returns another their own. Mara looked around the chamber. Small hooks covered the stone tree. Some held glass leaves. Hundreds remained empty. She understood. This place had never been about solving a mystery. It had been built as a living work of art. Every traveler contributed something. Every generation expanded it. She selected the leaf engraved wonder and slipped it carefully into her pocket. From her sketchbook, she tore a blank page and wrote one word, hope. She folded the paper into the shape of a leaf and placed it on an empty hook. Sunlight shifted. The paper glowed among the crystal leaves. For a brief moment, the tree looked complete. Then the light moved again, reminding her that no masterpiece is ever truly finished. Outside, the wind stirred the branches surrounding the forgotten greenhouse. Inside, the glass labyrinth waited quietly for its next visitor. Not to test her sense of direction, but to ask a far more difficult question. What will you leave behind for someone you've never met? The Glass Labyrinth, a fictional mystery thriller. Mara returned to Blackridge convinced she had imagined half of what she had seen. The crystal leaves, the hidden chamber, the tree of empty branches. They felt more like fragments of a dream than a place that could exist only a few miles from town. Yet when she emptied her backpack that evening, the delicate glass leaf, engraved with wonder, rested inside, catching the orange glow of the setting sun. It was real. Over the next several days, she searched local archives for any record of the greenhouse. There were photographs of farms, churches, mills, and railway stations. Nothing resembling the immense glass structure hidden on the hill. Then, buried inside an uncatalogued box of architectural sketches, she found a single unsigned drawing. It showed the greenhouse exactly as it must have looked when it was first completed. Sunlight poured through thousands of flawless glass panels. People wandered peacefully through the corridors. Children laughed beneath flowering vines. Musicians performed inside the central chamber beneath the crystal prism. Across the bottom margin, written in elegant script, appeared a single sentence: "A building should change everyone who enters it." The following morning, Mara climbed the hill again. This time she noticed details she had overlooked before. Tiny symbols etched into the remaining panes. Not letters, not numbers. Simple shapes. A bird, a key, a lantern, a river. Each symbol appeared only once. She traced them onto paper as she explored. When arranged in the order she had encountered them, they formed a path leading not toward the central chamber but beyond it. At the rear of the greenhouse, almost completely hidden beneath ivy, stood a narrow iron gate she had somehow missed during her first visit. The hinges protested softly as it opened. Beyond lay a garden unlike anything outside. Wildflowers covered every inch of the ground. Stone pathways wound gently between flowering trees. Small fountains whispered beneath climbing roses. Nature had reclaimed the place without destroying it. Instead, it had completed it. Near the center of the garden stood a circular stone bench surrounding an ancient oak. Suspended from its branches were hundreds of tiny glass leaves. Unlike those inside the labyrinth, these bore handwritten names. Not famous names. Ordinary ones. Some had begun to fade with time. Others looked almost new. A small wooden sign rested against the trunk. Every visitor becomes part of the garden. Mara looked at the glass leaf in her pocket. She understood. The leaf she had taken had never truly belonged to her. It had been waiting for its place here. She carefully hung it from an empty branch. As it caught the afternoon light, the engraved word wonder shimmered among hundreds of others. The tree chimed softly in the breeze. Not from bells. The sound carried to the quiet garden like distant music. Before leaving, Mara noticed one final object beneath the bench. A weathered guest book. Its pages stretched back decades. Visitors had written poems, sketches, letters to strangers they would never meet. Simple reflections on kindness, loss, hope, and joy. The final blank page waited patiently. Mara picked up the fountain pen resting beside it. She hesitated. Then she wrote only one sentence. Some places don't ask us to solve them. They ask us to become better, because we found them. She closed the book gently. The breeze stirred the branches overhead. Hundreds of glass leaves shimmered together, each catching the fading sunlight for only a moment before passing into another. The labyrinth had never been a maze designed to confuse. It had always been a journey designed to slow people down long enough to notice the beauty that only patience could reveal. And somewhere beyond the quiet garden, hidden behind broken glass and climbing ivy, the old greenhouse continued waiting. Not for explorers seeking treasure, but for ordinary people willing to leave behind a small piece of hope for someone they would never know. The Glass Labyrinth, a fictional mystery thriller. Winter arrived quietly. The first snowfall transformed the forgotten greenhouse into something almost unreal. Frost traced delicate patterns across the remaining panes of glass, while the iron framework shimmered beneath a blanket of white. From the valley below, the ruins disappeared completely, hidden by drifting mist and snow-covered pines. Mara found herself returning every weekend, not because she was searching for another secret. Each visit revealed something different. The labyrinth never changed. The light did. On the shortest day of the year, just after sunrise, a narrow beam of golden light slipped through a broken section of the roof. It struck the great crystal prism in the central chamber. Instead of scattering into hundreds of colors as before, the prism focused the light into a single brilliant line that stretched across the stone floor. Curious, Mara followed it. The glowing path led out of the chamber, through corridors she thought she already knew, and finally to a forgotten alcove concealed behind climbing ivy. There she found a wooden workbench covered with dust. Glass-cutting tools lay exactly where someone had left them decades earlier. Sheets of colored glass leaned carefully against the wall, untouched by time. Above the bench hung a framed blueprint. It was the original design for the greenhouse. Only now did Mara realize the building had never been finished. Entire sections remained outlined in pencil, but had never been constructed. In the margin, beside the unfinished wings, someone had written, "The final rooms must be completed by future hands." For several minutes, Mara simply stared at the drawing. She had assumed the greenhouse was an abandoned masterpiece. Instead, it had always been an unfinished invitation. The architect had expected strangers, people they would never meet, to continue the work, not by copying the past, by adding something of their own. Over the following months, word about the glass labyrinth spread quietly, not through headlines or television, through conversations. Artists arrived carrying stained glass. Gardeners brought rare flowers. Carpenters repaired weathered benches. Musicians performed beneath the crystal prism, where every note echoed softly through the corridors. No one tried to modernize the greenhouse. No one covered its cracks. They simply cared for what remained while gently adding to what had never been completed. The labyrinth became neither a museum nor a ruin. It became a living place. One spring morning, a little girl wandered to the restored garden, holding a small blue piece of sea glass she had found on a distant beach. She approached Mara shyly. "Can this belong here?" Mara smiled. "I think it already does." Together they placed a tiny fragment into an empty section of an unfinished stained glass window. When sunlight passed through it, a single blue ray appeared on the opposite wall. The girl laughed. It made its own color. "No," Mara replied softly. "It brought one that was missing." Years later, visitors often asked who had restored the glass labyrinth. No single name appeared on the entrance plaque. Instead, a simple inscription welcomed everyone who stepped through the old iron gates. Built by one dreamer, finished by many, never complete. People entered expecting to explore a mysterious ruin. Most left carrying something far less tangible. A renewed sense of curiosity, the courage to create, the quiet realization that the most meaningful places are not those preserved exactly as they were, but those that continue to grow because each generation leaves behind a little more light than it found. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, thousands of color reflections drifted across the labyrinth's ancient walls, reminding every visitor that even broken glass can become something breathtaking when enough light finds its way through. The Glass Labyrinth, a fictional mystery thriller. The years passed, but the Glass Labyrinth never looked the same twice. In spring, flowering vines climbed the old iron arches until the greenhouse seemed woven from blossoms instead of steel. In summer, shafts of sunlight painted the corridors with shifting rivers of color. Autumn scattered golden leaves across the stone paths, where they mingled with thousands of reflections dancing across the floor. Winter transformed every remaining pane into crystal lace. Visitors soon realized they could return 100 times and never experience the same labyrinth twice. It wasn't the walls that changed. It was the light. One afternoon, Mara noticed something she had never seen before. Near the entrance stood a young man sketching the greenhouse with remarkable precision. Unlike the tourists who admired the colors, he ignored the stained glass entirely. Instead, he measured every arch, every beam, every angle. When he finally closed his notebook, Mara approached him. "You draw like you're trying to rebuild it." He smiled. "Not rebuild. Understand." He introduced himself as Julian Mercer, a structural engineer fascinated by forgotten architecture. For weeks they explored every corner together. Julian believed every building carried the personality of its creator. The Glass Labyrinth, however, felt different. It wasn't designed to impress people, he said one evening. It was designed to change them. Mara laughed softly. I've been trying to explain that for years. As restoration continued, volunteers uncovered a narrow spiral staircase hidden beneath climbing ivy near the eastern wing. The steps descended into a cool underground chamber untouched by weather. Unlike the colorful greenhouse above, this room was built entirely from pale stone. There were no windows, no reflections, only silence. At its center stood a circular table carved from white marble. Embedded into its surface was a simple brass compass. The needle never pointed north. Instead, it slowly rotated before settling toward whichever staircase someone had used to enter. Julian frowned. That's impossible. Mara shook her head. No, she smiled. It's intentional. A small inscription circled the edge of the table. The journey always begins where you choose to enter. There were no hidden mechanisms, no tresure, no elaborate puzzle waiting to be solved. The room offered only an idea. Every visitor arrived carrying different experiences. Every journey through the labyrinth began from a different place. The discovery inspired something unexpected. Visitors began leaving small handwritten notes in the underground chamber, not because anyone asked them to, because the quiet room invited reflection. One note read, "Today I remembered how to slow down." Another simply said, "I called my brother after 10 years." A child drew a rainbow stretching across a cracked window. An elderly woman wrote, "Thank you for proving beautiful things can survive being broken." Before long, a wooden cabinet was placed beside the staircase to protect the growing collection. No names, no addresses, just anonymous moment of gratitude, hope, forgiveness, and courage. The labyrinth had quietly become more than architecture. It had become a place where strangers left pieces of themselves for other strangers to discover. Many years later, when Mara's own hair had begun to turn silver, she climbed the hill once again just before sunset. The greenhouse no longer looked abandoned. Children ran laughing through the corridors. Artists painted beneath the flowering arches. Musicians tuned their instruments in the central chamber. Gardeners carefully tended roses climbing the old iron frames. The building was alive. She stood beneath the crystal prism as the last rays of daylight scattered into thousands of colors overhead. Julian joined her, smiling as he looked around. "Do you remember what you said the first day?" She thought for a moment. "I said it felt unfinished." He nodded. "And now?" She watched a little girl hang a newly crafted glass leaf onto a young tree growing beside the original ancient oak. Another family paused to write in the guest book. An elderly couple quietly admired the stained glass windows, completed by generations of unknown hands. Mara smiled. "It still is." Julian laughed. "I hope it always will be." The evening bells echoed faintly from the town below. The last sunlight passed through thousands of pieces of colored glass before fading into twilight. For a brief moment, every corridor glowed as though the labyrinth itself had captured the day's final light, holding it just long enough for everyone inside to remember one simple truth. Some places are never truly finished. They continue to grow every time someone arrives with curiosity, leaves with hope, and quietly adds their own small piece to a story that will outlive them all. The glass labyrinth, Arc 2, the 13th window. For nearly 20 years, no one questioned the number. 12 great stained glass windows surrounded the central chamber of the glass labyrinth. Every guidebook listed them. Every architect sketched them. Every restoration record confirmed them. 12. Always 12. Until the morning one disappeared. No one saw it happen. The eastern window was simply gone. There were no broken fragments scattered across the floor. No damaged iron frame. Only an empty opening where colored sunlight had poured through for decades. Visitors stood silently beneath the crystal prism, staring upward. It must have been stolen. It couldn't have been. The frame is untouched. By noon, experts from across the region had arrived. Every measurement matched the original blueprints. Every bolt remained sealed beneath layers of paint older than anyone present. According to the structure itself, no window had ever occupied that space. Yet hundreds of photographs proved otherwise. Mara Ellison spread the images across a long oak table. Every photograph clearly showed 12 windows. Every modern inspection of the building revealed only 11. Neither could explain the other. Julian Mercer examined the iron framework through a laser scanner. The metal hasn't been cut. It hasn't even moved. Mara folded her arms. So where did it go? Julian looked up into the lattice of steel. I think we're asking the wrong question. She raised an eyebrow. What if... He hesitated. It didn't disappear? The room fell silent. What if something else changed? For 3 days, the labyrinth remained closed. Architects measured every beam. Historians searched forgotten drawings. Conservators compared thousands of archive photographs. Nothing explained the contradiction. Late on the third evening, Mara climbed alone into the maintenance walkways above the crystal prism. The narrow catwalks had not been used in years. Dust covered every plank, except one. A single trail crossed the beams. Fresh. Someone had walked there recently. She followed it carefully until it ended beside an iron support hidden high above the chamber. Carved into the metal was a tiny symbol she had never noticed before. A simple circle. Inside it rested the Roman numeral. 13, not 12. 13. Her pulse quickened. There had always been another window. No one had remembered it. The discovery triggered a complete review of the original restoration archives. Most documents still described 12 windows. Then an elderly volunteer arrived carrying a leather portfolio inherited from his grandfather, one of the greenhouse's earliest restorers. Inside lay a faded watercolor painted nearly a century earlier. The artist had labeled every window, not with numbers, with names: hope, patience, wonder, memory, kindness, courage, grace, joy, truth, silence, light, home, and one final title written in pale silver ink that had almost vanished with time: Possibility, the 13th window. No drawing showed what it looked like. Only the name remained. That night, as rain tapped gently against the greenhouse roof, Mara returned to the empty frame. Lightning flashed beyond the shattered glass. For the briefest instant, she thought she saw something impossible. Not outside the opening. Inside it, a faint outline, as though an invisible stained glass window still occupied the frame, catching the lightning for only a fraction of a second before disappearing into darkness again. She reached out instinctively. Her fingertips met nothing but cool air. Then a voice echoed softly through the silent chamber. Not loud, not frightening. Barely more than a whisper carried by the wind. You cannot see what the labyrinth has not yet asked you to become. The words faded before she could determine where they had come from. Julian entered moments later, his flashlight sweeping across the chamber. I saw the lights from outside. Mara slowly lowered her hand. You won't believe what I just heard. Julian looked toward the empty frame. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then he pointed upward. Mara. She followed his gaze. Moonlight had replaced the storm. Across the opposite wall, 12 windows cast 12 pools of colored light. Between them shimmered a 13th, pale, silver, almost transparent, visible only for a heartbeat before vanishing once more. The labyrinth had revealed another mystery, not hidden beneath the earth, not locked behind secret doors, hidden instead within memory itself. Somehow, an entire window had been forgotten by history, yet the building had never forgotten. And somewhere within the ancient framework of glass and iron, the forgotten window waited patiently for someone to remember not where it had gone, but why it had been erased in the first place. The glass labyrinth arced to the 13th window. Nobody slept well after the silver light appeared. By dawn, word had spread through Blackridge that something unusual had happened inside the labyrinth. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Some claimed an entire wall had vanished. Others insisted the greenhouse had begun changing by itself. A few dismissed the stories as another trick of old glass and moonlight. Mara ignored them all. Facts came first. Speculation came later. As the morning sun climbed above the eastern ridge, she and Julian returned to the central chamber carrying every instrument they could borrow: laser levels, thermal cameras, multispectral scanners, and architectural drawings dating back nearly a century. Every measurement agreed. The empty frame contained nothing. No hidden glass. No transparent material. No unusual temperature. The opening was exactly what it appeared to be. Empty. Yet when Julian overlaid the original blueprints onto a modern laser scan, one inconsistency refused to disappear. The geometry was wrong. Not dramatically. Only by a few centimeters. But throughout architecture, a few centimeters mattered. The circle formed by the 12 windows was no longer perfectly symmetrical. It had been designed for 13. Someone had rebuilt the chamber long ago and subtly shifted the surrounding walls to disguise the missing space. It was an astonishing piece of craftsmanship, so precise that generations of architects had accepted it without question. Someone didn't remove a window, Julian whispered. They redesigned history. That afternoon, Mara examined every restoration journal preserved in the archive. Thousands of handwritten pages documented repairs, storms, broken panes, deliveries of iron beams, and volunteer work stretching back decades. Nothing mentioned a 13th window until she reached the oldest volume. Its cover had nearly fallen apart. Several pages were missing. Near the back, pressed between two brittle sheets of paper, rested a dried silver leaf unlike any plant she recognized. Beneath it, written in faded ink, appeared a sentence so faint she almost missed it. When the 13th is forgotten, the labyrinth will remain beautiful, but incomplete. There was no signature, only a small emblem, a circle divided by 13 tiny rays. Julian spent the evening studying photographs taken inside the greenhouse over the past 50 years. He enlarged hundreds of images, searching not for what appeared in them, but for what should have. Then he found it. In almost every photograph, visitors unconsciously avoided standing before the empty frame. Children ran around it. Tour guides stopped just short of it. Wedding photographers positioned couples one step to either side. No one had instructed them. No signs directed them. Yet everyone instinctively left the space untouched, almost as though some invisible presence quietly encouraged people to walk around it. Julian stared at the sequence of photographs for nearly an hour. They'd been doing it for decades. That evening, heavy fog rolled across the hill. The greenhouse stood wrapped in pale mist, its broken roof disappearing into darkness. Mara entered alone. She carried no cameras, no notebooks, only the silver leaf recovered from the journal. Standing before the empty frame, she held the leaf toward the fading light. At first, nothing happened. Then the last ray of sunset struck its surface. The leaf shimmered. A narrow beam of silver light crossed the chamber and touched the empty opening. For one breathtaking moment, delicate lines appeared in midair. Not glass, not light, something between the two. A magnificent stained glass window slowly revealed itself, composed entirely of shimmering reflections. Unlike the other windows, it held no colors, only countless tiny mirror fragments. Each reflected a different part of the chamber, different visitors, different moments, different seasons. As Mara stepped closer, one reflection caught her attention. She was no longer looking at the present. She saw the greenhouse exactly as it had appeared generations earlier. The missing window stood complete. Children laughed beneath it. Artists painted nearby. An elderly woman gently placed her hand against the silver glass before smiling at someone beyond the frame. The vision lasted only seconds. Then darkness returned. The window vanished once more. Only the empty opening remained. Mara's heart raced. The 13th window had never reflected the world. It reflected memory itself. Somehow, the labyrinth had preserved echoes of every generation that had ever stood before it. Not in photographs, not in journals, within the glass. Outside, the evening bell from Blackridge echoed softly across the valley. Inside the silent greenhouse, Mara slipped the silver leaf carefully into her pocket once more. She no longer believed they were searching for a missing window. They were searching for the forgotten reason it had once been considered the most important window of them all. The glass labyrinth arced to the 13th window. The following morning, the greenhouse remained closed to the public. A handwritten notice hung from the iron gates. Restoration in progress. Thank you for your patience. Only a handful of people knew the real reason. Inside the central chamber, Mara and Julian had recreated the exact conditions from the previous evening. Mirrors redirected sunlight through the crystal prism. The silver leaf rested on a velvet cloth at precisely the same angle. Every measurement was recorded to the millimeter. Nothing happened. The empty frame remained exactly that. Empty. Julian sighed and lowered the light meter. It isn't responding to the light. Mara nodded slowly. It's responding to something else. By noon, they had exhausted every scientific explanation they could think of. Temperature, humidity, seasonal angles, glass composition, magnetic fields. Every result was perfectly ordinary. The labyrinth refused to reveal its secret twice. As Mara packed away the equipment, her eyes drifted toward the old guest book resting beneath the ancient oak in the garden. Thousands of visitors had written in it over the years. She suddenly remembered something. The mysterious silver window had appeared only after she had reread one of the earliest entries the night before. Not immediately, but moments later. She hurried outside. The guest book was enormous now. Its earliest volumes had become too fragile for everyday use and were stored inside the archive. Carefully turning page after page, Mara searched for the oldest handwriting. Some entries contained only names. Others were poems. A few were sketches of flowers that no longer bloomed in the garden. Then she found an entry unlike the others. The ink had faded almost to invisibility. Only under soft afternoon light did the words become readable. Every window remembers a different truth. The 13th remembers the ones no longer remembered by anyone else. There was no signature, only a date. 87 years earlier. Julian compared the date with every document they possessed. A smile slowly crossed his face. The greenhouse closed for restoration that same week. So that's the week the architectural drawings changed. He spread 2 blueprints across the table. The first showed 13 windows. The second, created only days later, showed 12. Someone had revised the official plans almost immediately after the mysterious journal entry was written. Not because the building changed, because the records changed. History itself had been edited. Late that evening, a violent thunderstorm swept across Blackridge. Rain hammered against the glass roof while flashes of lightning illuminated the maze in brilliant white. The greenhouse stood empty except for Mara. She had no experiment planned, no hypothesis left to test. She simply sat beneath the crystal prism listening to the storm. As midnight approached, the rain suddenly stopped. Silence settled over the labyrinth. One final flash of distant lightning illuminated the empty frame. This time the silver window appeared instantly, not faintly, completely. Every mirrored fragment shimmered like liquid moonlight. Instead of reflecting the chamber, however, it reflected faces. Hundreds of them. Visitors from different generations. Children, gardeners, artists, builders, musicians. Some smiled, some laughed, some simply stood quietly beneath the glass. Each reflection lasted only a heartbeat before another replaced it. Mara realized with growing amazement that these were not ghosts. They were memories. The window had preserved every person who had ever paused before it with genuine wonder. Then the reflection slowed. One final figure remained. An elderly architect wearing a long wool coat. He looked directly toward Mara through the silver glass, not at her reflection, at her. Slowly, he raised one hand and pointed, not toward the window itself, but toward the unfinished eastern wing of the greenhouse. His lips moved silently. No sound emerged. Then the image dissolved into countless fragments of light. The chamber returned to darkness. The window vanished. Mara remained motionless. She had no proof of what she had witnessed. No recording. No photograph. Only one undeniable certainty. The forgotten window was trying to guide them somewhere. Not into the past. Towards something that had never been completed. Somewhere beyond the eastern wing. Hidden among unfinished walls of forgotten blueprints. Another chapter of the labyrinth story was still waiting to be discovered. The glass labyrinth, Arc 2, the 13th window. The eastern wing had always been the least explored part of the glass labyrinth. Visitors admired the restored gardens, lingered beneath the crystal prism, and wandered the colorful corridors. Few ventured beyond the faded iron gate marked restoration access only. There was little to see, or so everyone believed. At first light, Mara and Julian unlocked the gate. A narrow corridor stretched ahead, swallowed by climbing ivy and decades of silence. The stained glass panels ended abruptly, replaced by unfinished iron ribs that reached into open air. Here, the greenhouse looked less like a masterpiece and more like a construction project abandoned halfway through. The floor was covered with a thin layer of dust, until Julian noticed something. There are footprints. Not fresh, not old enough to have disappeared. A single set led deeper into the unfinished wing before stopping in front of a massive circular wall built from pale limestone. No dorgua, no windows, only smooth stone. Mara ran her hand across the surface. Why build a wall here? Julian unfolded the original blueprint. His eyes widened. This isn't supposed to be a wall. What is it supposed to be? He pointed to the faded drawing. A gallery. They spent the next several hours examining every inch of the stone. No hinges, no seams, no hidden locks. The wall appeared solid. Yet when Mara tapped gently near its center, the sound changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Solid stone became a low, hollow echo. She smiled. Something's behind it. The blueprint offered one final clue. In the margin, almost erased by time, someone had written a single instruction. The gallery opens only when no one is searching for it. Julian laughed softly. That's wonderfully unhelpful. As afternoon sunlight shifted across the unfinished wing, a beam slipped to the broken roof and struck a small brass disc embedded in the floor. Neither of them had noticed it before. The disc reflected the light toward another polished plate hidden high on an iron column. Then another, and another. The chain of reflections slowly formed a complete circle around the stone wall. One final ray landed directly at its center. A deep metallic click echoed through the silent wing. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The circular wall began to move, not outward, sideways. Stone glided silently into surrounding structure, as though the mechanism had been waiting decades for that exact alignment of light. Beyond it lay a room untouched by time. Unlike every other chamber in the greenhouse, this one contained no broken glass, no Venus, no signs of decay. The walls were lined with shelves holding hundreds of carefully crafted crystal models, miniature bridges, libraries, gardens, observatories, theaters, schools. Each represented a place where people gathered, learned, or created together. At the center of the room stood a large wooden drafting table. Across its surface rested an unfinished architectural drawing. The title read, "The House of Shared Stories." Mara looked around in amazement. This is another greenhouse. Julian slowly nodded. It's something much bigger. Pinned beside the drawing was a handwritten letter. The ink remained remarkably clear. If you have reached this room, then the labyrinth has already fulfilled its purpose. Its task was never to protect itself. Its task was to find the people capable of building what comes next. Silence settled over the chamber. For years, they had believed the glass labyrinth was the destination. Now it seemed it had only been the beginning. Julian carefully examined the architectural plans. The proposed building surrounded a vast public square. Instead of galleries filled with paintings or sculptures, every room was designed for people to contribute something of their own. Music, writing, craftsmanship, science, gardening, teaching. Every visitor will become both student and creator. At the bottom of the final page appeared the architect's personal motto. Buildings should not only shelter people, they should inspire them to build one another. Mara smiled. She finally understood why the 13th window reflected memories instead of colors. It had never existed to preserve the past. It existed to recognize those ready to carry its ideas into the future. As evening sunlight entered the hidden gallery, the crystal models scattered thousands of tiny reflections across the unfinished drawing. The room seemed to come alive, not with magic, with possibility. For the first time since discovering the glass labyrinth, Mara realized the greatest mystery had never been hidden behind secret doors or forgotten blueprints. It had been hidden inside a simple question the building had quietly asked every person who entered. What will you create that allows others to create even more? And somewhere beyond the hidden gallery, beyond the unfinished eastern wing, beyond the hill that overlooked Blackridge, the answer had already begun taking shape, waiting for the next dreamer brave enough to turn an impossible blueprint into something real. The Glass Labyrinth, Arc 2, the House of Shared Stories. For weeks, Mara and Julian told no one about the hidden gallery, not because they wanted to keep it secret, because they feared the room would disappear beneath crowds before they understood why it had been built. Every morning they returned with notebooks, cameras, and measuring tools. Every evening they left with more questions and answers. The crystal models lining the shelves appeared identical from a distance. Up close, each was unique. One represented a library whose walls were made entirely of books contributed by visitors. Another showed a concert hall with no permanent stage, allowing performers and audiences to exchange places. A third depicted a garden arranged not by professional landscapers, but by children planting whatever they imagined belonged together. None of the designs emphasized perfection. They celebrated participation. Julian carefully lifted one crystal model from its pedestal. Beneath it, etched into the polished stone shelf, were 8 simple words. The builder is never more important than the builder who follows. He read the sentence twice before looking at Mara. I've spent my career trying to design buildings people would admire. And now, he smiled quietly, now I think the best buildings are the ones people continue. In the center of the gallery stood the unfinished blueprint for the House of Shared Stories. For days it seemed incomplete. Then Mara noticed faint pencil lines extending beyond the edge of the paper. She placed another blank sheet beside it. The lines continued perfectly. The drawing had never ended. It had simply been waiting for another page. Piece by piece they assembled additional sheets hidden beneath the drafting table. The building grew larger with every page. Reading rooms opened into gardens. Gardens connected to workshops. Workshops overlooked theaters filled with movable walls. There was no grand entrance, no imposing facade. The architect had designed a place where every doorway felt equally welcoming. Near the final page, a handwritten note appeared in the margin. Architecture should never tell people where they belong. It should help them discover it. Late one afternoon, sunlight poured to the unfinished eastern wing. As it crossed the hidden gallery, every crystal model scattered tiny reflections onto the blueprint. The beams intersected. Rooms glowed one after another. Then the reflections gathered at a single point near the heart of the drawing. A small circle, no larger than a coin. Mara leaned closer. Inside the circle, invisible until illuminated, was another inscription. Begin here. There isn't even a room there, Julian observed. There is now. Without saying another word, Mara picked up a pencil resting on the table. For the first time in decades, someone added a line to the unfinished blueprint. Then another. She wasn't changing the architect's design. She was continuing it. Julian added a note describing a flexible studio where visitors could teach one another any skill they wished. Neither of them hesitated. The blueprint no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to everyone willing to imagine what came next. As dusk settled over Blackridge, the crystal models shimmered one last time before fading into the evening shadows. Mara rolled the expanded blueprint carefully and placed it back on the drafting table. The hidden gallery felt different now. Not complete. Alive. She glanced toward the corridor, leading back to the glass labyrinth. For years she had believed the greenhouse guarded its greatest treasure behind locked passages and forgotten walls. She finally understood the truth. The treasure had never been the gallery. It had never been the 13th window. It had never even been the remarkable building itself. The true treasure was the courage to leave something unfinished. Not through neglect, but through trust that someone, someday, would care enough to continue the work. As they closed the hidden chamber for night, a soft breeze drifted through the eastern wing. Somewhere above, the remaining stained glass windows caught the last light of sunset. For just an instant, a pale silver reflection flickered across the stone floor. The 13th window had appeared once again, not to reveal another secret, but to quietly acknowledge that its purpose was finally being fulfilled. The glass labyrinth, Arc 2, the first stone. The news spread slowly, just as Mara had hoped, not through newspapers or television broadcasts, but through conversations carried from one person to another. There's a place where ideas are still being built. There is a blueprint no one person can finish. There is room for one more dream. Within weeks, architects arrived carrying sketchbooks instead of presentations. Teachers came with lesson plans scribbled on loose paper. Gardeners brought seeds collected from family gardens. Musicians carried worn instrument cases. Woodworkers, glass artists, historians, engineers, poets, and children all crossed the old iron gate with the same uncertain expression. No one had been invited personally, yet everyone seemed to know they belonged. The unfinished blueprint remained at the center of the hidden gallery. Beside it lay a simple wooden box containing pencils of different lengths. No instructions, no signatures, only a brass plate engraved with a single sentence. Leave the drawing better than you found it. At first, visitors hesitated. Who was bold enough to add a line to the work of an unknown master? Then an elderly carpenter quietly drew a wooden reading bench beneath a maple tree. A teenage violinist added a circular performance space where audiences could sit among the musicians instead of facing them. A botanist sketched a greenhouse filled with endangered plants, each accompanied by the stories of the people who protected them. Piece by piece, the blueprint evolved, not through one brilliant vision, through hundreds of thoughtful contributions. Julian began documenting every addition. Surprisingly, no one erased another person's work. Instead, they expanded it. A child drew a bridge across a small stream. An engineer returned days later and carefully designed the bridge's structure without changing the child's original shape. A baker suggested an outdoor kitchen. Nutrition students transformed it into a community cooking school. Artists designed walls intended to be repainted every year. The building seemed to grow naturally, as though every idea had been quietly waiting for another to complete it. One evening, Mara climbed once more to the central chamber beneath the crystal prism. The labyrinth was empty. Moonlight poured through the 12 stained glass windows. Then, almost imperceptibly, a pale silver glow appeared where the 13th window belonged. This time, the reflections were different. She no longer saw memories from the past. Instead, she saw fleeting images of possibilities. Children building together. Scientists explaining discoveries to strangers. Neighbors planting gardens. Storytellers reading aloud beneath lanterns. None of the scenes looked extraordinary. That was precisely what made them beautiful. The silver window had never predicted the future. It reflected futures that people could choose to create. When Mara returned to the hidden gallery, she found something unexpected. The blueprint had changed again, not because anyone had visited. The fresh pencil lines added by dozens of contributors had somehow blended seamlessly into the original drawing. It was impossible to distinguish the century-old ink from the sketches made only days earlier. Julian examined the pages in disbelief. The paper hasn't changed. The story has. Mara smiled. The architect planned for this. She gently touched the corner of the blueprint. It was never meant to preserve one person's vision. It was designed to become everyone's. As dawn broke over Blackridge, the first rays of sunlight passed through the restored stained glass windows, scattering ribbons of color across the hidden gallery. For a brief moment, every crystal model illuminated at once. Their reflections converged on the center of the blueprint, where a single new sentence appeared in shimmering silver light before slowly fading. Every masterpiece begins the moment someone believes they are allowed to add their own line. The light disappeared. The words vanished. But no one who witnessed them would ever forget. Outside, the old glass labyrinth stood quietly against the morning sky. It was still unfinished. And for the first time in its long history, everyone understood that was never a flaw. It was the promise that there would always be room for one more dreamer, one more builder, and one more story waiting to become part of something greater than any single generation could create alone. The glass labyrinth, Arc 2, the letter without a name. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. It bore no stamp, no return address, no signature. Someone had slipped it beneath the iron gate before sunrise. Mara unfolded the heavy cream-colored paper with unusual care. Only a single sentence had been written in dark blue ink. The house of shared stories is already being built. You simply haven't found its first room. Julian read the note twice before looking up. I thought the blueprint was only a vision. So did I. Neither of them spoke again for several moments. If the anonymous message was true, then somewhere beyond a glass labyrinth, someone had quietly begun transforming imagination into reality. Over the next month, for more letters appeared, always before dawn, always written on the same paper, always in the same elegant handwriting. None revealed the sender's identity. Instead, each offered another fragment. Look for the place where strangers stay longer than friends. The strongest foundation is conversation. Count the empty chairs. The messages sounded more like reflections and instructions, yet everyone hinted at a real location. One rainy afternoon, Mara and Julian decided to stop searching for unusual buildings. Instead, they searched for ordinary places where people naturally gathered. Libraries, community gardens, public workshops, small cafes, neighborhood parks. The clues no longer pointed toward hidden architecture. They pointed toward human connection. Late that evening, they entered an aging brick warehouse that had recently been converted into a shared workshop. Painters worked beside engineers. Woodworkers shared benches with robotic students. Children built miniature bridges from scrap timber, while retired craftsmen quietly offered advice. Nobody seemed to own the space. Everyone belonged to it. Julian slowly smiled. This feels familiar. Mara nodded. It feels like the blueprint. The workshop manager greeted them warmly. We've been expecting visitors. Mara froze. You know who we are? The woman laughed softly. No, I just knew someone would eventually come looking. She reached beneath the reception desk and produced an old leather folder. I was told to give you this. Inside rested a faded architectural sketch. Not of the glass labyrinth, not of the house of shared stories. It depicted dozens of small buildings scattered across different towns, connected not by roads but by flowing lines resembling threads. Across the top someone had written, "One building can inspire a city. A city can inspire the world." There was still no signature. As they left the workshop, the rain had stopped. Children were drawing chalk murals across the pavement outside. An elderly musician played violin beneath the shelter of an old oak tree. People who had arrived as strangers were leaving together, laughing as if they had known one another for years. Julian folded the sketch carefully. I think we've misunderstood the blueprint. Mara glanced back toward the workshop. It was never about constructing one extraordinary building. No, it was about helping ordinary places become extraordinary. For the first time, the glass labyrinth no longer felt like the center of the story. It felt like the beginning of countless new ones. Somewhere, the anonymous author of the letters continued watching, not to test them, not to hide another mystery, but to ensure that the ideas born beneath the stained glass roof would keep traveling from one community to another. And on the hill above Blackridge, as evening sunlight filtered through the 12 familiar windows, a faint silver shimmer briefly appeared where the 13th window belonged, as though the labyrinth itself approved of a journey that had finally expanded beyond its own walls. The glass labyrinth, Arc 2, the cartographer. The 6th letter arrived folded inside an old map. Unlike the previous notes, this one contained no poetic phrases, only a network of circles connected by thin ink lines stretched across the yellow paper. At first glance, it resembled an antique railway map. Julian quickly realized it wasn't. There are no town names, no rivers, no roads. Mara traced one of the circles with her finger. Each was marked with a tiny symbol instead of a label: a lantern, a book, a tree, a violin, a compass. Near the bottom of the page, in handwriting they had come to recognize, appeared a single instruction. Maps usually tell you where to go. This one tells you where people began to change. The first symbol, a lantern, led them to a tiny lighthouse on the edge of a rocky coast. The building was no longer in use. Yet every Thursday evening, volunteers gathered there to teach navigation, astronomy, and local history to school children. No admission fee, no advertisements, only a handwritten sign above the entrance. Everyone is welcome. Inside, hanging beside the old lighthouse lens, Mara discovered a familiar emblem carved into the wood, a circle with 13 tiny rays, the same symbol they had first seen high above the crystal prism. Someone had been here before them. The second destination lay hundreds of miles away. It was not a grand museum or a famous landmark. It was a neighborhood library occupying the ground floor of a converted textile mill. Bookshelves filled every room. But what drew Mara's attention was the largest wall in the building. Instead of books, it held empty wooden frames. Visitors were encouraged to fill them with handwritten stories from their own families. Some accounts described immigration. Others recalled childhood adventures, acts of kindness, or moments of forgiveness. No story was considered too small. Julian smiled. It's another house of shared stories. No, Mara replied quietly. It is the house of shared stories. She was beginning to understand. The blueprint had never pointed toward a single destination. It described an idea that could appear anywhere people chose to nurture it. As they continued following the mysterious map over the following months, the pattern became unmistakable. Every marked location shared 3 characteristics. None had been designed by the same architect. None belonged to the same organization. None even looked alike. Yet each encouraged strangers to become collaborators rather than spectators. An abandoned railway station transformed into an art studio. A neglected orchard reborn as a public garden. An old theater where audience members finished unfinished plays left behind by previous visitors. Every place seemed to carry the invisible signature of the glass labyrinth. Not in stone, not in glass, in spirit. One evening, after returning to Blackridge, Mara spread the map across the drafting table inside the hidden gallery. For the first time, she noticed that the ink lines connecting the circles formed a familiar shape. Not a railway, not a constellation. The outline of a tree. Its trunk began at the glass labyrinth. Its branches reached outward across towns and generations. Each destination was another leaf, another story, another act of quiet generosity. Julian stood beside her in silence. The labyrinth isn't the end of the map. Mara nodded. It's the root. She looked toward the unfinished blueprint resting beneath the crystal models. For years, they had searched for hidden rooms, forgotten windows, and secret passages. Now the greatest discovery seemed almost impossibly simple. The true labyrinth had never been made of iron corridors or stained glass. It was the invisible network created whenever one act of creativity inspired another and another, until people separated by hundreds of miles unknowingly became part of the same story. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the ancient oak in the garden. Hundreds of glass leaves chimed softly together. Among them, one silver leaf caught the fading light and shone more brightly than the rest, not as a signal that another mystery awaited, but as a quiet reminder that every journey worth taking eventually becomes a path others are willing to follow.